Welcome. My name is Elisa Iturbe, and I have the honor and the pleasure of introducing our lecturer tonight. And to give a little bit of context, I am organizing a curated lecture series at Cooper this year. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, our full event calendar involves many independent lecture series and collaborations, such as our collaboration architecturally. We have a student lecture series. But I also have the opportunity to curate a lecture series of my own, which is titled Architectures of Transition. And these events are motivated by the fact that we have reached an ecological brink, and against the daunting horizon, architecture's response has been undeniably insufficient. The climate crisis is intensifying unabated, and this is in part because architecture, as both a discipline and a practice, continues to replicate the spatial, cultural, and material patterns that constitute an energy-intensive way of life. So in that light, this year's lecture series is going to interrogate architecture's allegiance with the project of carbon modernity, from the early moments of industrialization to today's advanced stages of fossil fuels. At stake is architecture's role in broad civilizational transition, which was unquestionably problematic during the last transition into fossil fuels, yet at the same time is indeterminate and full of possibility as we look forward to the transitions to come. So this challenge is multivalent, and it will require not only rethinking the relationship between energy and form, but also the very nature of architectural knowledge itself, as we actually discussed in our first event with Mackenzie's work last week. If you missed that, it's available online. But with that context, I'm delighted to introduce Tatiana Bilbao, whose pedagogical experiments at the Yale School of Architecture have long been an inspiration to me, which you know. And I've had the pleasure to see the work for many years in a row, and each year has been more daring than the last. And I witnessed a studio around which a culture and a body of knowledge has emerged. And it could not be clearer from Tatiana's teachings that domestic space is ripe with potential and undoubtedly fruitful terrain for rethinking the social contract that binds us together, or in some cases keeps us apart, but nonetheless is in desperate need of rethinking. So in that vein, this event is also part of Climate Week here at Cooper and has the support of the Cooper Climate Coalition. Now, I'll give you a few other biographical details. Tatiana she founded her eponymous studio in 2004 in Mexico City with the goal of foregrounding social values and collaboration in her practice. The studio combines design and research and has been at the center of many major design collaborations, including a 100-kilometer pilgrimage route near Guadalajara that involves both Mexican and international architects. More recently, the Pilares initiative, which we're actually going to have an event about here at Cooper in collaboration with the Architecture League on October 12th. Be sure not to miss that. And Tatiana also teaches, and she holds a recurring position at YSOA, the Yale School of Architecture, and she's also taught at the GSC, at the Architectural Association of London, at GTAC, Rice, at the University of Andrés Bello in Chile, and at the Peter Behrens School of Art in Germany. Her design work has been featured in the New York Times, You, Domus, and any number of design publications. Her awards and accolades are numerous. I won't list them all because we'll be here all night. And without further ado, I give you Tatiana.
Thank you, Lisa. It's for me an honor to be here. You have been an inspiration to my work as well, pretty much. I have been specifically very much inspired by your editorial work at Log 47, the architectural carbon form. And I have since very long before worked around those notions of how the city has been completely filled and is totally surrendered to the forms in which we obviously engine our society. We energize our society, but also how we capitalize our society. No? So for me, it's really an honor to be here with you tonight. And when you asked me to come here and publish me with my pedagogical experiment, I hope the students don't mind, call them experiments. I really thought what are the questions that have been driving the work I do since ever. And I was asked to give a lecture of 7 questions, which I also invited you. And basically, those are the questions that I normally pose to myself, to the work we do, and the students that I teach, because I believe, as the prompt of this 7 questions lecture was, that we, at least if we don't have the answers, we need to pose the questions. And I believe that those are the things that I prompt when I'm teaching also in the school. So maybe capitalizing on that lecture, but expanding on that notion and intersected with those interests, I thought of, showing you which are the 7 questions I'm currently thinking, but I am also been working for a long time. Shall I shower now? I'm not going anywhere. We all have really experienced, with the privileged ones, the benefit of having a society that has developed, I think, to a point that we have running water in our bathrooms, in our houses, and this is, of course, hyper comfortable. This has really been serving as a functional aspect to our cleanness for several years, more than a century. But I question myself, when did we decided that this could happen in just a box that even by code is allowed not to have natural illumination and ventilation? When did we forget that showering, bathing is part of one of the most important aspects of taking care of our body? But not only the notion of understanding the necessity of caring for our body, but also the necessity of bonding with others. No, a bathroom is not necessarily only a place for literally making the functional aspect of washing and going to the toilet, but also it's a place for intimate activities that have lost its possibilities because the space don't allow us to do that. No. When did we lost the notion of bathing together and understanding that the care for our body is also the care for the body of others? No, this is something that in society they understood very well. In our case in Mexico, the temazcal was a ritual that it was offered to the gods. The moment of thickness and of contact with our own intimacy was a shared place, was a social place, and was a place that it was completely ritualistic. But bathing, one of those aspects, obviously encompassed in a small room, has not only been discriminative of those rituals, but also we can see it as a discrimination of other forms of nurturing a body. With bathing, we can talk the same about sleeping. I mean, who decided that we all needed to have a room or X measure with a flat thing that we call bed to sleep? No? We do all need to sleep, but not all of us do it the same way. No? And all of us not think of it the same way. Especially, I also come from a culture where sleeping in some of the communities in my country doesn't happen in those pieces of furniture. Nevertheless, the code in our country eliminates the possibility of sleeping in any other thing that is not a bed, a standardized size bed. And in as I said, this community, the Maya community, have never slept in a bed. Nevertheless, these past 30 years, we have been changing the way they sleep, because the law would not allow that. So I question, really, do we need to understand the production of space based on functions, on necessities, or on the ways we really do those things, the ritualistic aspects of those? When we will design spaces for rituals to exist? For me, this is a question of the habitual. Shall I take the car? I'm not in a hurry anyway. We know that our cities are completely surrendered to the car and how the car has connected us. And every city is, if it was not designed for the car, has been transformed to allow those things to exist. They have directed our physical space for our mode of life. We don't decide anything or nothing, not around the car. It's even become, it has become, I'm always speaking from when I come from Mexico, a very essential part of the identity of any family or any person in the whole country. And we have started to build houses for those cars. And the space that the cars take in our built environment, it's really something of consideration. So it's not only that we have designed houses for cars for several years, but also have directed the most essential designs and have really balanced possibilities of life to develop in those. In this case, for example, it is kind of the driving design aspect, and every developer, every real estate developer, every designer that works in these units that are developing social housing in Mexico, they start with the operations on how many cars they need to park, how many square meters do the cars need, how many, what are the radius for the cars to turn around. And this is how a unit for 6,000, 10,000, or sometimes 100,000 people living is designed, and the design is based. Obviously, this creates this notion of the ideal configuration of the house with the car in the front and the yard on the back, create the reduction of those that has been built into the code, but also has expelled, really people from living in the most prominent spaces in the cities or in actually any place in the city. So for me, really, there is a necessity of understanding what is the city, as Elisa has asked us many times before, post this form, post-carbon form. When we will stop doing houses for cars. For me, this is a fundamental question of housing. Shall I cook again, or there's something to eat? Obviously, one of the most controversial aspects of the domestic environment has been talked in the kitchen. For many reasons, I'm not going to go into the question of the kitchen very, very deep, but obviously there's not the ideal house, even so written in the codes. There's not a house if there's not a kitchen in there. But really, who decided that this was the way we all had to imagine to live? And this is something we have exported and transported across cultures, across generations, and across everywhere in the world on how we shall live. And that definition means having a kitchen. Yeah, we do all have to eat, but do we all have to have a kitchen in our houses? But also, I mean, that is a very big and controversial question, but I'm always even referring to a further notion, if one wants to say, of when did we lose the aspect of understanding that eating is not only, again, a mere functional thing. I mean, definitely our bodies get nurtured by nutrients, by proteins and vitamins. But that is one of the aspects of food. But food gives us the possibility of relating to our own histories, cultures, surroundings, caring of others, of us. And that is an aspect that cannot be done in a kitchen of 1 meter or 2 meters long, merely functional, tucked in an apartment by itself. Not even the inventions of those open kitchens really promote the possibility of understanding, nurturing our bodies through food, but as a ritualistic aspect. This is something we have learned working broadly. So if we would have stayed in Mexico City, probably this is something you don't see very often. But we go to the communities, we work with them, especially after the earthquake of 19th of September 2017. And we really understood that nobody thinks a kitchen should be inside. To start with, a kitchen is social. So how can you think of bringing your neighbors or your community inside your own intimate space? That's a question they never have understood. But secondly, because you cook with really rich ingredients, we have that possibility of having rich ingredients in our food, because obviously we don't want to cook something that is, forget about mole or very spicy, just onion with oil, because this would smell in your apartment, in your bed for the next month. So really, are we just even laying down the codes, the notion that we really have to talk in a kitchen inside a space? But also, I mean, learning from, again, the culture that we come from, not everybody cooks in the same form. Not everybody uses the same apparatus to cook. And the food comes differently if you translate those things into different ways of cooking. One other aspect, is the notion of sharing that food. We also have forgot that is an important, we also seem to have forgot that it is an important aspect, not only for community bonds and ties, but also for transmission of culture, history, story, bonding, caring, etc., etc. And it's really, for me, an important question to understand how to create nodes and possibilities to open, obviously, gender discriminations, but basically to go even further, to really understand how to build up a society from a different perspective. For us has been really the notion of translating, the possibility of having different spaces that are not conceived standardized, that are really trying to create pockets of encounters that do not kind of hold the stereotypes of how a house should be designed. When we will stop doing houses, for me, that's the question of everything. Shall I bring the girls? I need a break. I have 2 girls. And since I started my career, every journalist that has interviewed me asked me if I have kids. I learned not so long ago, unfortunately, that every time I get this question, I reverse the question, have you asked this to my male colleague that you just have interviewed? The answer is obviously always no. Why would people ask me? Because that's how society is built. The mom should be the one who takes care of the children, And the houses have been surrendered to create a platform for doing that, for talking in that possibility. For me, it is really a notion of understanding that if we don't talk about care, we can never talk about equality. Nevertheless, we create platforms for equal opportunities, etc., etc. If we think that men and women can work the same, and that would be the solution for, kind of giving a platform for women to do things differently, we are forgetting that the most important things in our society, which is how we care for our own existence. We live in a moment of extremes, we all know, and we live in a very big friction. Right now, to exist, we need to produce. But the friction comes when we think that to produce, we need to exist. So if we don't understand how to transform the spaces that we have in the city, of course, used in fuel in a different way, not using carbon fossil sources of energy, but we also need to create platform for different social relationships, which is very well also addressed in the same number by Vittorio Aureli and Maria Giudici. And for this is understanding spaces for different social relationships, speaking of care. For me, there is no other way than you see this of care. wages for household work would not arrive very soon. But if we understand that there's an estimate of this huge number, which I cannot even read, that is today only in the US not being paid for housework that is done, then we really need to understand how to sustain that work in a much more horizontal way. And I believe that architecture has been that possibility, because today care cannot be done collectively, cannot be done shared, and obviously is not paid. And this is how much people who do care are subsidizing the economy of this country. This is only of the US, of a year work or housework, what has not been paid. I really like what Fernanda says in the introduction of her book, Mi Casa, Tu Ciudad, Privacidad en un Mundo Compartido. It's not in English still, that book, but I think it's close to be. And she says, if we're able to see the differences between the house that we wish and that one is necessary for the planet and the one that we pay and clean every day, those are because the modern house had its origin in three fictions. The house is a place of rest, as if work could be separated from life and housework would disappear. The house is a private property within everybody's reach, as if when considering it a commodity, it would not be determined by market-driven dynamics, making it unaffordable to the majority. And the house is a sanctuary for nuclear family, husband, wife, and children, as if there were on all other forms of coexistence, and private and public were two independent facts. I really think that if we need to understand, how to talk in and open sources for different possibilities of social relationships, we could advance to think that really existing in this planet is our most important task, and we need to hold on it. This is something we experimented last semester in the school at Yale, at YSOA, I never say that, Yale School of Architecture. And understanding how to intersect possibilities of care and space that would create platforms for collective and shared futures. When will they stop asking me if I have children? For me, that's the question of family. Shall I cancel the doctor's appointment? She only has a stomach ache. That's again going back a little bit to the notion of existing and producing. As today, we depend either on production or institution to take care of our bodies or the bodies of others. This means, again, going back to being able to be in a system, an institutional system that is paid for. But when we forget to that care for our own bodies, health of our own systems starts in the house. The house right now is, again, built in this friction that relies on other institutions and other public spaces to provide first and most important things that a body needs. One of them being healthy. The second one being educated. Why did we eliminate those possibilities of happening in the most important place, the places where we're born, the places where we are raised, the places where we should happen and should pass our most important days? Obviously, this relies on the fact that the system needs to have, is based on the notion of private property. With this, and a problem that our society relies on, which is obviously impossible to address by either architects or even the current society, I believe, is something that creates a platform of these impossibilities. So how can we create architectures that are really going in and beyond those understandings and eliminate those possibilities to open spaces for the majority? When we will see the end of capitalism? That's the question of property. Shall I go and harvest the tomatoes on the rooftop now? They're dying. we have, I think, arrived to the moment where we believe that man can control the universe. This is a mural that Diego Rivera did in 1933, Mind Controller of the Universe. This was commissioned for Rockefeller Center. It was not accepted. Then he redid it in Mexico afterwards, long after it has been reproduced. But I really think it's even more relevant to think of it today. When did we thought that we could dominate nature? Especially, I think we should start understanding that our major problem is that we talk about nature as if it was a separate entity. Us and nature, humans and nature. We are nature. We are part of that system. And every single advancement of technology, we're separating more ourselves from our own ecosystem. How can we create architectures that, instead of banning the understanding of ourselves as part of as this ecosystem, and how can we really create platforms for those bodies not to be removed from the ecosystem that is almost expelling us for that at the moment? I believe that there is a very important part of the society, especially in this country, I'm sorry for saying that, but this is what I believe, is that their bodies are almost in the verge to be de-adapted from the natural environment. People that live in 72 degrees Fahrenheit their whole lives, bodies that are never exposed to different temperature. You know, they live in their homes that are 72 degrees, no matter what's the temperature outside, what's the temperature, no matter if outside is 120 or 30. And they go to the office, it's the same temperature. They jump in the car, the same temperature. They go to the shopping mall, same temperature. And obviously, when they spend 3 hours, 4 hours outside with just the regular weather, they get sick. And it is because we are really arriving to a point where we, for the sake of comfort, for the sake of security, for the sake of protection, we have separated our bodies from the environment. And architecture is a culprit on that. How can we think then to do an architecture that really engages us with the ecosystem back again? When will we stop thinking that we can save nature?
Báñate.
That's the question of us.
Toma.
Will
Báñate.
this
Te vas a
building
sentir
survive
mucho
this
mejor.
earthquake?
Me
This
siento-
third earthquake on the 19th of September. I mentioned the earthquake of 2017 in Mexico, and I don't know why, and this is just a parenthesis. On 19th of September of 1985, we had the biggest earthquake that the country has seen. 100,000 people perished. It was really, really, really bad. That was 19th of September. And every year since then, every 19th of September, we do a drill, a national drill at 11 a.m. There's a flag ceremony at 7:21, which was the hour of the earthquake. And yesterday, 19th of September, it was the third 19th of September, we had a really big earthquake in the city. The one yesterday had no consequences, fortunately, but it was a very big earthquake again on the same day. The one in 2017 did a lot of destruction, not the same as the one in 1985. But obviously, living in this condition of a threat that can really make the city, I mean, I'm being a little bit too dramatic, but even disappear. I was 12 when the earthquake in 85, and I saw how a building turned down, basically turned apart while it was while the earthquake was passing. So really, for me, I'm always aware what it will survive from our times, no? And I had wondered this since I was very little, and I went to visit beautiful things in Ireland and England that had been there for centuries. And I have been also very close admirer of ancient civilizations in our countries. And I always have wondered what the civilization in 1,000 years is going to see from what we're building today. I don't think we're thinking for that long. I don't see the built environment really thinking that these buildings will be there for 1,000 or 2,000 years, as many buildings that were built before have reached that time. But more than that, why don't we think, how can we really even think to create more? If we have enough square meters in the whole world to house the population that we have by 3, that's what they say, but obviously they're badly distributed. So how can we think of buildings that could have life that would surpass all this time? For me, what will remain in 1,000 years from today is the question of history. So as I've been kind of prompting you with these questions, I have been exposing a bit on the preoccupations we have built, the work we have done. As I said, I believe completely that the cities of today will definitely change, introduce a different form that fuels them. But there's many other aspects that really have to be transformed. Not only that the city is completely surrendered to the notion of being a place for efficiency, for turning us much more kind of able to do in less time things that are not paid to in order to produce more. It's obviously more and more expelling the majority. No, the only thing that is remaining in those places, in the cities, in the urban environments, in everywhere in the world, is capital, and that is expelling the majority of the population. So definitely, I'm not so naive. I am a little bit, and I understand completely that architecture cannot solve the problems of the world, but definitely architecture is the platform from where we do and operate today. So if architecture has become the driven of the form how we are living today, and it is really there as a platform for how efficient or non-efficient we need to or be, then we need to think that architecture can definitely produce a change. So I'm thinking, what is then the form of that city? What is the form of the city of care? Definitely is somewhere where it really allows a body to exist. And recently, I've been, not so recent, it's almost going to be 6 years now, I was invited to work in a monastery. And this is the only place that I really think that I have found myself in which a body is designed for a body to exist. First and foremost, and with everything, and very bluntly. Now we cannot hear it, so I should put the volume up. Is this gonna make? Well, maybe no. Maybe we don't.
Feedback.
Oh. All right. Good running. Okay.
What happens?
Can you hear? No. Well, don't worry. I have learned, obviously, that a monastery is what I was saying. The only typology I have ever found where it's completely designed for the body to exist in order to be able to live the life that they are willing to hold, which is a spiritual one. So how this place really holds a body to exist is something that I have been researching all these years, and it's something that has provided me a platform for a lot of the things that I've been doing afterwards. I think that, of course, I'm not saying we shall all live like monks, and definitely I'm not here to defend any type of spiritual life surrendered to any type of ritual, but I do think that there is a very important example, at least the one that I found, to understand how to create a space that is designed, first of all, with the biorhythms of the necessities of the human body that really is perfectly orchestrated around the hours of the day in synchrony, in perfect synchrony with the necessities of the human body. So obviously in a ritualistic aspect and taking the ritualistic aspect to the life they surrendered to do, but it's really very interesting how this place goes from a very intimate notion of being with yourself to a much more communal in stages. So first of all, a monastery is designed as this, as a place where you are allowed to have your own intimacy, your own individual self being nurtured by that, because that's part of our nature. We are individuals that need that to grow, but also we need the other to do the same. So this place is orchestrated. Every monastery, Cistercian, at least monastery that I have encountered, is the one we're designing as a Cistercian monastery, is really thought as exactly this, a place where you have your individual self that then is connected to a more social space, which is only shared by your own brothers. Then that space is connected to the large part of where the rituals are done, where only the closed community can access. And then this is connected to the place where they can encounter the larger community outside, and then to the exterior. And the day transgresses and progresses exactly in those rhythms, from the most intimate one to the most collective one in stages, and the other way around in the same way. The understanding of the ritual versus the habitual is very important, because that is what defines the physical space of the monastery. And for me, those two things are aspects that could be translated into the domestic realm in order to configure a much more a system that is more sustainable in terms of the understanding of the existence of our own bodies in them. Since very long, even longer than working for the monastery, we have been trying to explore what is that space. And in this case, we were called to do a design for a house that had no one specific that would have inhabited, hasn't been built. And we started understanding how to create spaces that would hold anybody's existence in there. So we thought, okay, we cannot escape ourselves from an aesthetical definition of the space, because it's going to have one, regardless of what we can do or think that we can escape of it. But we can definitely not specifically think that the spaces could be used for a specific thing. So what we did is we created these very aesthetically defined modules. Why? Because we like them. And we spread them in the landscape, thinking of them as points that mark different areas of relationship with the nature and the surroundings. And then allowing anyone to inhabit it the way they feel it's more accommodating to the way they live. Starting to think, what is an architecture that become a platform for anyone's existence? Not thinking, how can I think of anyone else's existence, but that they could develop their own existence in that place. Problems started when we needed to represent that space in plans and sections, and not only that, to submit plans to the authorities. If we were thinking not directing the spaces and not specifically addressing a program and not defining which room should be used for anything, then we needed a new form of representation, because architecture also doesn't allow that, or the way we conceive how architecture should be represented. So we did these plans, which are, you cannot see in this image, it's very hard to see, but these are little thin transparent papers, which have also can be formed as models, and they show plan sections and they can be folded and then they become a model. And the idea is that these would be loose enough to direct different notions of inhabiting the place. Then we needed to create images, and we asked someone in the office, Gonzalo, in this case, to imagine his life in there and just draw whatever he thought of each space, how it could be. This already was, kind of getting into problems which we wanted to avoid. The house has not been built, so I don't know what is that going to be as an experiment. Then we were asked to do another house to be, it was a call for designs for a program called Ways of Life. And actually the brief called for designs to respond to new ways of life. And this was 2017. And the brief was asking for a place where people could live and work at the same time. It was kind of the beginning of live-work movements, which I found very strange because I think that we have lived and worked in the same places since day one. First of all, because taking care of ourselves, the most important form of work, but also not only that, because we have also been doing productive work in the same places where we inhabit and grow since we started humanity, but the last 200 years and only in urban areas, because in the majority of the world, people inhabit and in the place where they do reproductive work, but also productive work. So for me, that was a strange statement. And I thought, maybe why don't we do a house for the ways of life, for anyone's ways of life? And which ones are those? We don't know. We have no idea. And I hope we never have. So we thought, well, why don't we create spaces that for us promote different types of activities or emotions, but not necessarily are specifically directed to that. So we started, kind of putting those in this chart. Then we said, now what? Then we chose 6 of the spaces because the program asked for 6 spaces. A room, a living room, a kitchen, a bathroom, two bedrooms, and a studio, etc. So we said, okay, let's do 6 spaces, different ones, and that they promote different things. And then we collaged them. This was the beginning of the problem. We decided to also design with different tools. And we decided to use collage the first time for design. So we collaged those 6 spaces. It was already pretty hard because not for all of us, the words we put that those spaces should be defined on, it represented the same image. So it was already a discussion. And when we had the 6 images, we said, okay, now what? We collaged them all together. And this came out. And we decided, okay, the spaces those 6 spaces, are represented here. Some of them are more related to the ground. Some of them are more isolated. Some of them really allow for a much more social exchange. Some of them are more intimate, more small, etc. And we finally shaped the house and we arrived to a result that I would say I was pretty disappointed, because when we arrived we had to deliver, we had to go there. It is in Germany. We had to present it. And obviously I said, well, we could have arrived the same design starting with the same premises, and doing 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom and a kitchen and a living room. But yeah, that stayed there. Obviously, the process of designing with collage is very important because this was the first time we did that. A lot of things emerged at that time in the office. But a year later or something, they call me and they say, there's a person who wants to build this house. And he looked at the design and he thought it was perfect for his way of living. I was like, okay, what is that? And I talked to them and they had studied the plans in full, and they described me the way they would inhabit his house in a completely different way, exactly the opposite on which I had imagined to inhabit it. So I already thought, okay, this is a start. We have developed since then construction plans. We're going to start right when the big pandemic hit it, and we're going to start a year after. Now we finally started construction of this house, and it's very exciting. So it's something that we have been developing since we did this design strategy for a very low income mode of inhabiting in Mexico, in any area. That was the intention of the design. I'm not going to stop there. But I think it's even going further. No, it's understanding that, again, not all of us, we do all need to sleep, but not all of us do it in the same manner. We do all need to cook, but not all of us really do it individually in our houses. And some of us even not with the same appliances at all. We took it further because we thought that was too restrictive, and then we created another strategy for a very low-income housing, thinking and introducing kind of the notion of how those individual cells need to relate to a more collective space, and then a more common space, and then a more collective one, and then a more public one. And we developed this strategy that is also incredibly affordable for people to build their own module and being allowed to have units that are conformed differently, but also communities that are serving specifically to the purposes of the community and not the efficiency or to render to the production. We have done this in several dimensions, and we have worked in the horizontal realm, for example, in St. Louis, Missouri, which we're transforming a block, normal urban block from the city, into a space that it becomes that, individual houses that are very intimate, that already from the core of the houses are designed to be, kind of having stock in space, and then the spaces that are more collective, the houses are the ones that relate more to the exterior. Those exterior spaces are shared with the community, and then those exterior spaces also unfold to spaces that are shared by the larger community, even the city. So instead of developing row houses in a single block in any neighborhood, which is a typical one from many cities in the US, we are creating a different kind of types of relationships within that context. This is under construction. And in this case, we collaborated with Moss here from New York, with Productora from Mexico, and with Macias Peredo. We have been trying to then understand how to do that in more collective forms. To start with, I think that there's no way to think collectively if it's not collectively. So I've been doing a lot of collaborations, probably thinking that those platforms of working with different architects, different professionals can allow to have more voices in the table, therefore respond and create platform for more people to exist. But also thinking how can not only those platforms of collective thinking can become collective, but also much more different ideas and ways of inhabiting a territory can coexist in the same realm. And we have been trying to develop this in several processes. In this case, it was it is a building in Monterrey. It's called Silica. And they asked us to create a community of 160 units. First of all, we said there's a contradiction on thinking how to create a community of 160 units. Can we think of an integral community? Then we need to blur the notion of unit. We need to blur the notion of efficiency. So what is efficiency in a community is not connecting you to your individual door, the most efficient way. No, it's really creating those pockets and those moments of non-efficient circulations in order to create more efficient communities. So we were experimenting also with that. And I think that the notion of the understanding of the monastery has been very influential in those types of research that we have done in the domestic realm. And I think that with this, I will finish because I'm already taking an hour, and I would really like to talk to you, Elisa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tatiana. That was really wonderful. And I'll ask maybe only a few questions because I'm sure there are many from the audience. But I think maybe the framing, I'll start with the framing around care and the way in which you talk about how the city, we can't think about even a notion of equality without thinking about care. And then there's a question of how we sustain the work of care, and so how we allow that care to even occur. And I think this is a really crucial question, and I think it really is grounded in domestic space. But I also wonder that sometimes it's not the most obvious link to then say that that also is a kind of question around care for the environment, and is this kind of question also of, or that is very relevant for the question of climate crisis too. And so I wonder if maybe we can unpack that a little bit.
Well, those are very big questions, very, very, very big questions. But I definitely think, I mean, maybe it's too of a somersault to be arriving there by your questions. But I do think that it reduces to the fact that we have lost the notion of care. And whenever we are able to connect to the idea that to produce, we need to exist, but that in a very broad sense, like really understanding that to build our whole society around it, I think we will connect with the notion of our own natural body, in this planet, in this land. And that for me triggers like everything in a domino, right? We have created, I think our society is built upon the notion, first of all, that we needed protection from that nature that we belong, that we are actually, not that we belong, that we are part of it. And then from there, needing to be productive to create that protection. And that's really, taken to exponential numbers and arriving today has really allowed us to even forget that we come from there, right? So I think we need to return to that idea of really understanding the necessity of taking care of our bodies. And it's not something that it can be alone, because on the other hand, we are not auto-sustainable. No, we cannot do it for ourselves. We need the other to care for us in order to subsist, half of our lives we are cared by someone, and half of our lives we need to care for the other. So this means we need to have this collective ground in order to exist. And so that is exactly the basis of the work that I've been trying to do. And for me, that kind of is the core question, because that eliminates a lot of notions, of standardizations, of ideas of society, of social configurations, of discriminations, in many ways, because then, if you go to the bottom line of the question of how to care for our own bodies, and society would be surrendered to that, and the rest doesn't necessarily develops as we are today. Well, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate how you take that question, which seems like an inward-facing question.
Yeah.
But inevitably, the result is that the house breaks open, the unit disaggregates, things kind of start to open in what might otherwise be considered a kind of inward-facing thing. And so I think that the notion of production is really central to that, of course. And I think that, it seems like you're getting at this rooted assumption around the privacy of the home and challenging it. And so you're not rooting the idea of care around an idea of like kind of our notions of a commodified privacy, right? That you kind of build this shell around you. And that's what I find really incredible. So I wonder, that maybe is a segue to my next question, which is in one of the early slides when you were talking about the baths and you showed the public bath, you said, we often cannot do this because the space does not allow it, right? And so I'm really interested in this question of affordances, right? The affordance form, right? And everything, that's at the root of the carbon form idea too, right? That, we configure space in a way, and no matter how we arrange our architecture in our cities, form will allow certain things and disallow others, right? And this is at the root of some of our agency as an architect. the fact. And even though you talk about spatial affordances relative to some of the legal requirements, you talk about how building code will require a bed. Nonetheless, there's embedded in your work this idea that the architect can still overcome some of those things in part through getting at this question of type. And if there is a way of configuring space that can open up all of these possibilities. But I wonder then, because there were some instances where you were talking about type, and there were some instances where you were also talking about something that, like a sort of project where there was no kind of standard, you always had to kind of think about things as unique and exceptional. And so what is the balance, I think, between kind of starting to say, okay, like what is the replicability of some of these things? Can we start to create an architectural type that challenges all of the existing types, and maybe through its replicability kind of is neck and neck with, what we're competing with, but then other instances where the project is so unique? How do you kind of balance those?
I mean, yeah, to start at the beginning of what you were saying is that I think that basically we can reduce to the notion, to the idea, I mean, very simply explain, no? Right now, there's no place for me to share the work I do for my children with my 6 neighbors. There's no way. I don't have a kitchen that could allow me to cook for all the neighbors. I don't have a laundry space that could allow me to share the laundry with them. I don't have anything. I cannot bathe all the kids at the same time because there's no room. Literally, there's no physical space for doing anything in a shared manner in the domestic realm, because it has not been recognized as, first of all, as a labor, and as a labor that needs to be shared, because it is impossible otherwise to be really sustainably done. That's actually kind of the frictions of the modern society. So I do agree, no, architecture can enable things or can prevent them for them to happen. And I think right now, architecture is not a platform for caring for our bodies. It's a platform for production, with no doubt, no? And then that is one of the questions that I've been thinking all the time, no? One of the issues is that we have been standardizing in order to, obviously, to address the majority and the most collective heterogeneous collective that we are. No? It comes obviously from a good proposal, no? But by that means of standardization, homogenization, we are eliminating the possibility of everyone. We are trying to include all of us, but eliminating the possibility of each of us at the same time. What is then the possibility of an architecture that becomes, that platform for each of us individual to exist with our own differences, with our own possibilities, and still be collective enough? I don't know. And still be produced collectively and still be, addressing the majority. I don't know. I've been trying to search for that. That's something I still have as a question. I don't answer.
I think you're generous to say that we standardize with good intentions. Actually, when you talk about the home as a platform for production, I think we can think about it as the kind of productivity that occurs within the home and that we do, but also the fact that it's this financialized mechanism that's just meant to accumulate wealth, right? So there's also it's an instrument for accumulating wealth in most cases, first and foremost, right? And the unit becomes the way in which you kind of quantify and
which is subsidizing the wealth. Exactly. By the way, that machine, because inside has that labor that it's not paid, and that number I showed, which is $10 trillion, is the number that is not in the economy, and it represents 23, I think. I mean, it's an article of the New York Times. 23 of the highest and most successful companies in the U.S. The revenue of a year. That's how much is not paid for doing this labor. So that's subsidizing the economy directly. So people who's doing that labor, which is the majority is women, 95%, is subsidizing the economy in order for it to exist.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and all that comes from that unit.
Yeah, we talked about that in my seminar this week. I hope you guys are here. Well, let me open up to the audience because I'm sure there are many questions. Yeah, Martina.
Hi, and thank you for the lecture. I thought it was super interesting how you talk about the dangers of generalizing sort of the way we live and how people sleep different, think different, interact different in the kitchen, and even just thinking about, the difference of living in Mexico City versus how people in the countryside live versus. So I think my question is really about how you approach a project when you have a specific site and you research the specific kinds of domesticity that exist or are needed in that space or in that community. I mean, work with eponymous or, in St. Louis or any kind of, even if it's just a house in Mexico City, it all requires different kinds of living. So I'm interested in the research process that sort of leads you to what you might propose or think of in your studio.
Well, it's never scientific method, and it's very difficult to be described because it always I think it's based on is in the stories behind it. It's based on personal stories, on impersonal stories, but on the stories that are revolving around it and that form that necessity or that specific request for that space. And therefore, since it's not something that can be described because those are very complex and very layered, the process is very different in every process. No, but I feel that we have. Especially, that's the way I was taught, and I still see a lot of it around. That we learn to start designing from a physical aspect, And I believe that if we are doing spaces for humans, we have to start with the conversations with the people and the humans, not with the physical aspect and the physical descriptions. Then we are right there. But I think that the starting point for me is always, it's never the physical aspect of it, the site or the code or those things. Those things come later. So first we start conversations, we understand stories, we try to subtract the stories and we try to create the new story for that. And then when we have a story, then we start thinking on how we could physically represent it. And then the physical action starts.
I'm not very well versed in this.
Can you speak up a little bit?
I'm not very well versed in this stuff except in school, but I was wondering, how you could, because the question of sustainability is making these structures and systems that work well for a community, but how do we integrate these systems into the buildings that already exist? Because there's so much land that's already used. The buildings that are dysfunctional, but how do we transform those buildings so that we're not using up more land and not necessarily destroying, but how do we minimize the carbon footprint of fixing our carbon footprint?
I mean, I believe that we have to invest a lot of thought on that. As I said, we need to be all of us conscious that we have more square meters built in the earth than those we need by far. So how to really think on that, for me, is also a way of starting how to think on what we do. Obviously, I'm part of the problem. I've been doing more from zero than reusing, but I think that definitely there is a necessity, urgent necessity of thinking how to transform the spaces that that are in the built environment right now than doing that. It's challenge, but also I think there's an urgent necessity of those spaces who anyway will be built newly. And I'm saying this because I come from a context which is not perfectly consolidated, So sometimes I see this as a very good opportunity, but also this good opportunity comes from a very difficult place because it's very precarious, and the precarity in this system, in this capitalist productive system, is very harsh. Especially it is seen with those eyes. So for me, this answer is ambivalent, no? Because in some parts of the world, like in the US or in Europe, for example, where cities are completely consolidated and everybody has opportunities of having, not a precarious form of living, precarious, however you want to describe it, any eyes you see it, then I think it's completely irresponsible to build, right? From on those places who are not consolidated and really have not fulfilled the possibility of the majority to have a decent protection, the necessary one, the normal one, not the extreme one, from to create their lives, then I see it from a different eyes. But I think definitely this is a question that needs to be thought, even on those conditions where you are building something new. Is that building going to be able to be transformed and used, and how much it will remain? I mean, how long it will stand for? It's ridiculous now. You ask any provider of material, and they tell you that their material has a 10-year guarantee. I'm like, 10 years? Really? 10 years? This building needs to last 1,000. What are you talking about? In 10 years, this whatever paint the panel thing is going to fade, and yeah, they do. So yes, again, we have to think, how can we think of buildings in order what it will remain in 1,000 years, and what are we using today that can use in the future or will not be able to be used in the future.
Do you think wages for housework could be an emphasis for a different kind of architecture for reproductive labor, or are you more skeptical about quantifying and applying the kind of market logic to this kind of more effective labor of care that I think, you talk about in both terms, in both economic terms, but also in those kind of more only effective and necessary terms?
No, I do think that should be recognized as the most important job we have to do. And I go with Silvia Federici, wages for housework. I really think that that should happen, but it's not going to happen. It doesn't look soon till the economy recognizes that as labor. So if that's not recognized, then how we can do it collectively, socially, in order to make it more first of all, recognized, second of all, much more equal and really allowing opportunities for erasing discriminations in many, many ways. So if it's not going to be paid, then how can we create platform for that to really become something that is sustainable for society? Not as it is now. And you were commenting that on one of your questions, no? I mean, if we still continue to think that can be solved within the realm of the built environment that we have, I don't think it's possible, because the very first problem is how that is configured as, first of all, is erased from space, is not recognized, and it's not recognized that it needs to be done collectively. So
I think that's really important in terms of the space too, because the reason that the spatial structure disallows it is because we create this kind of closed perimeter, right, around domesticity that is kind of locked in place, right? So of course, at this time, we have thousands and millions of single family homes, and suddenly we said, okay, domestic labor is suddenly going to be compensated by whom, right? Like a lot of what needs to happen in a process where that labor is recognized, the reconfiguration of labor and where that labor takes place in the city. And that means, again, opening up the home, opening up where the kitchen is located, where laundries are located, bathhouses, et cetera. And so, yes, I understand the concern about, like, does this suddenly become like a market logic? Is it suddenly commodified? But I think actually the lead in to the labor being recognized is in it being shared first, right? And then we can kind of think about the systems by which someone can actually make their livelihood from that labor. And so I think it's a question of livelihood, maybe more than the commodification of the labor.
It's not that we live thing, not the commodified version of it.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think there's something, I think we talked a lot about the social agenda and what I think really appreciate that. There's also, you have very specific tastes for mediums, for representation, for how you work through things. There's no, you can't really find like, CAD drawing style or, renderings of sorts. There's always collages, it's always, sketchy or handcrafted, drawings. And, in the first part of the presentation is very dense, a lot of, pieces of artworks or reference images, each of them you can tell sort of minutes, but you sort of cross through them. You obviously have this sort of portfolio of things that you're referencing to. And my question is like, how does this specific work, the specific method, like let's say ways of working, these specific images or mediums or ways of working helps you to imagine them in a social way?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a very interesting question. For me, when I finished school, I felt really, really insecure of my abilities, first of all, at that time. I went out of school and I thought, oh my God, really, I learned nothing. All my friends think they can build things for someone else, and I don't know how to start with. Then little by little, I realized it was not an insecurity, it was a real comfortability. I was not comfortable with the fact that I could design anything for anyone to inhabit it. And then I started then thinking, what would be then what I would do, in architecture, and how could I insert myself in there? And I understood that the mediums that I learned and the way I learned what architecture was and how architecture needed to be done was a problem and was really creating frictions on the things that I thought architecture should be. First of all, I always thought that architecture needed to be that, a place for you to inhabit. I'm the translator, I'm the architect, I'm the one who's sitting there, but you will live there. So how can you live there in a place that I imagine? I don't think there's any way, but that's exactly what we do. And but then how can you read what I'm thinking if you and I don't share the same way of inhabiting and existing in this planet? And I definitely thought that plants vendors reduce that and create the most basic and simple form of communication, and maybe that's why we use them. I thought they needed to be much more platforms for imaginations on your own ways. So this is why I have challenged the traditional way of drawing and the traditional way of representing projects. And I have been doing throughout my career a search on how. I have realized that collage is a very interesting medium because, first of all, allows many voices to coexist in the same drawing, many different ideas, but also, and most importantly for me, what it is that it's able to be read in infinite manners and in infinite manners of creating possibilities for each of us to be represented in that drawing, So if I can read it my own way, I can be represented in the drawing itself, and which doesn't happen in a typical architectural drawing. So I've been trying to create that. And in the other hand, I think an important necessity is that for me, where I was taught architecture at the time and the moment, social existence were completely banned from the drawings and from the notion of creating architecture, but also from the drawings of them. So for me, those are the stories in which I rely my work on. So they needed to exist, and collage allowed me a lot of those stories to be embedded on it. So that's also part of that. I mean, it's a question of a whole lecture or a full career, but that's to make it short. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that the way that you see bodies and space and in relation to other bodies is really beautiful, and that the way that you represent them is really comprehensive and easy to see, especially in relation to what you're talking about. I'm interested in how you presented architecture as something that maybe needs to last for 1,000 years, but at the same time, we're thinking about all of these transitions that need to happen and are happening. So I maybe would question whether architecture needs to last for 1,000 years, or can it be something, or should it be something that is maybe more coexisting with the earth and in the coexisting of our bodies together as like a collaborative act, and that being a need that is something that we need to happen in the future, in the upcoming future. If there's a way for architecture to maybe not last 1,000 years, but coexist with the earth in a way that architecture as an idea maybe will last for 1,000 years, right?
I mean, that is a really good question, because also that's another fiction that architecture has intrinsically in, Architecture is static while inhabiting is a process. So how can you, encapsulate and frame that process, which is the process of inhabiting a planet, which is a process, into a fixed thing? It's not possible. So I really think that is one of the big questions. How can we create architectures that become part of that process, and not only become part of the process, allow that process to exist, and not, encapsulate those in moments and frame them in times? I also have that question. Who can we pose that question to?
You want to pose that? Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering what your thoughts are in increasing care for cities like New York, right? It's very transient, and so might not be as ritualistic or ritual, and also facing people being so busy and trying to do different things than necessarily caring and cleaning.
New York is the capital of the world. And the world we're living on is rent to production. I'm not sure New York is a very complex place. And I think that for me, New York is a place where you live for the city. It's not a city that you live in, you live for. And everything is completely placed as it. So it's one of the most complex environments for me to be transformed. I have no answer. I wish I had.
It is a really difficult question. But, in many ways, New York City creates its own networks of care because it is a very harsh environment. So there are ways in which, people are more likely to kind of spontaneously help each other in the street in New York, for example, and there are things of this nature. But I think at the core of your question is maybe not just like how to fix New York, but how networks of care might emerge in a situation where maybe you don't have, the culture in Mexico is so different from the culture in the United States, whether it's New York or not, right? And so there are already kind of networks of familial care, or even like extended kin networks that are embedded in the culture, which in the United States is less common, right? So I think your question is maybe more about like where networks of care might emerge otherwise. No, is that maybe more what your question is?
Yeah, and also I guess there are so many different types of people, so there is less of a standard here. So like, for example, just like the standard of like what you can do on the streets.
Do anything on the street.
I agree, but I also think that is exactly why in New York there are a lot of things also happening, and that like those answers, for example, the community fridges. I'm not sure if they emerged here, but they are like, I first saw them here. I don't know where, but those things, are kind of reactions towards the harsh environment that exists. So probably there is a possibility within that, a necessity of really pushing this of a society that's hyper heterogeneous, that it has a completely that has a platform that erases, first of all, the possibility of acquiring that heterogeneity, but also the necessity of care. So in this super harsh environment, those things can emerge easier, I would say. One of the very big challenges the 20th century was built upon the premise that we needed to search for equality through democracy, right? Although we haven't achieved that, we're now in the 21st century. I believe that the challenge of the 21st century is how to do that, but really acknowledging that each of us, each individual of us is different. So how to create, an equal base for a democratic future based on our individual differences is the challenge of the 21st century. New York has it at least top. I don't know if it's very impossible. Oh, yeah.
I want to thank you first for your wonderful lecture. I've been thinking about doing this issue for a long time, and this has given me so much to think about. In your first 7 questions, you sort of address, the kitchen, the bathroom, the sleeping area, and how they're all trying to be embedded in the house, which really seems to try to give the house this self-sufficiency where the house can do everything. And I would back to that laundry, because now everyone has asked for in-house laundry service. And then on the larger framework, it's all relying on the car. It's all designed on the car, which on that urban scale implies that it's not self-sufficient because you always have to leave the house to go somewhere else to get stuff. And so I like that dichotomy that you pointed out to me is very interesting. And then through Professor Iturbe's classes, there's this notion of when you start creating collective spaces or community spaces, then that area then becomes self-sufficient. And so when you do the reverse, it sort of opens up this possibility of a place disorganizing itself. And I don't know, I think that's just something that I really appreciate that you sort of pointed out, but also I guess the question is, you're not always given the opportunity to build on such a large scale, or you have to insert yourself into moments or places where there is already an existing framework in place. A lot of your projects are wonderful because they sort of dictate how they want to be, but then the reality is that no one is really going to always get that. And so I guess I'm more curious about the individual units that you designed and how they sort of push this idea of community forth and sort of apply it to their neighbors. And then sort of very separately, I noticed that he used a lot of paintings by Edward Hopper, and he sort of takes the familiar and makes it very strange. I think it's kind of what you're making us think about in the moment of what we assume is the standard.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the urgencies for me is to eliminate dichotomies, to erase binaries. No, I think that more and more the society has become binary in every sense. And we're not binary. We are very complex people that cannot be encapsulated in or be in between these dichotomies that are so expressed everywhere. The private and the public, the private and the institutional, the individual and the collective, and et cetera, et cetera. How can then we create spaces for those two to relate? Right now we just have physical walls literally that separate them. How can we create those stages that allow those relationships to be more sustained? And for me, the architecture can do a lot. As I said, we have been using the most simple device, which is the divisions, the lines, the walls, that's it, even with nature, inside environment, protected environment, exposed environment. And more protected, more layers, more encapsulated, and how then we can erase those dichotomies in order to produce more sustainable relationships with our own selves, with our own surrounding, the nature that we are in, et cetera, that we belong to. And on the other hand, I think that really the task of architecture, and I understand is very difficult, but if we believe, exactly what also Pier Vittorio Aureli says very much, it's impossible to imagine right now an idea for the city, and it's been very hard to think of the city as a project for a very long time, for 50 years. But if you think that every city is built upon the fact of the sum of its own architectures, then we do have a very big responsibility because we are building the city, even though we're not thinking of it in a scale like that, or we cannot even think of it because right now it's we think it's unthinkable, but we're building it every step that we do. And it's hard to imagine, no? You think, oh, this is a super large problem, but I remember myself a very long time ago, literally, probably 20 years ago or even more, that it was the moment where we started being conscious that we couldn't use plastic, that plastic ended in the seas. I mean, this is a very simple example, but I remember myself saying, well, yeah, give me a plastic bag. What's going to do it, no? One more. And then I went somewhere, I saw an animal in the sea, with a plastic thing. I never consume again a plastic. And maybe that's not going to do anything magical and change the environment forever. But if we all, think that we are assumed of the problem, and we are part of the problem, then we can change it. So I think that architecture needs to hold to this position, holding itself accountable for, the act of building the city and the society that we live in today, and then therefore able to be transforming it.
Maybe there's another dichotomy that you're trying to erase here, no? Because where I think as architects, it's very tempting to say, we can only work within a single project or within a single parcel, and thus we have no effect, or you're the maniacal Corbusian figure who wants to design the whole city, right? And so part of what you're saying is erasing that dichotomy and recognizing that each work of architecture is a building block. And part of what we have to challenge is the nature of that building block itself. And so that in many ways, I mean, if we're going to talk about an architectural transition, I mean, it's very much located there, right? And how we transform each of those building blocks to begin to rewrite the relationships between them, which is then ultimately how a larger transformation takes place.
Exactly.
We should probably start thinking of our last few questions. I know there are probably a million more, but
yeah, I'll put a hand. So thank you so much for your lecture. And I think of you as a practitioner before I think of you as a teacher in some ways. And so I was very struck in the early part of your lecture, reflecting on how building codes resist the very kind of transformation of domestic space that you would hope to be able to accomplish. So I've been thinking, in terms of your practice, do you find yourself thinking, imagining that architects should be more concerned with policy? Like should architects be operating in the policy realm, which can potentially have a pretty deep impact, or in the formal realm where one is saying, how does one test through forms, some of these ideas? And so would you potentially, rather than looking for or waiting for a conventional apartment building to do a design of, like potentially say a dormitory, where the nature of domestic relationships are already outside the kind of single family norm, or senior citizen housing, or I don't know, that kind of thing. So what do you find yourself looking for as a practitioner to really do and take these experiments kind of out into the world?
I mean, I think that furthermore, and what I always think that I want to challenge myself, but also that's what I teach the students to do, is challenge those notions that everything is, as it's prescribed. I mean, some things work. It's not that nothing works, but challenging them, questioning them, would allow us to do more for pushing forward a different, for a change that is most needed in our society. And I think that everybody decides their own battles. No, I think that one of the incredible things would be to influencing policy. I have been wondering also with that around in many ways in Mexico is a much larger process, and then you have to insert yourself in a collective, kind of more collective fight, if you want to say fight or position, in order to create an impact. But I think that definitely for me, it's very important, and I cannot imagine practicing otherwise without questioning everything. Well, I've been like that since my whole life. My mom said I was bottom down. And my mom said that since I was very little, I was challenging the convention. Since I was not even born. And it's true, but I think that we, in order to engage with a possible, and for me, what I find meaningful is to challenge those notions, and find where or at least what I've been trying to do is find where I could be more useful in that direction. And that is also why I teach. And why I also in Mexico, I engage with policymakers or housing institutions. And I don't know how much I can do, but I just can do whatever I can do. But I do think that, kind of, for me, what is meaningful is to position yourself in something and really carry it through, no matter how difficult it is.
And if I can just throw in something as an additive, in some ways one might imagine that with a generation of young people feeling that they're never going to be able to afford a single family house, we actually have hundreds of millions of people who are really probably right to consider new ways of inventing housing that is affordable and is sustainable and does pose other social relationships. So there's something that makes me think it's a really potent moment to be, as architects, really challenging and offering alternate formal ways of organizing lives and
Absolutely.
and rethinking the whole notion of family, what a family.
Absolutely. It's no longer sustainable in anything. It's not only not affordable, it's not possible because there's no more room to it, the majority of the cases. No. So yes, I hope that this is something that will start the possibility of a transformation, really. Yeah.
So first of all, thank you for sharing your beautiful work and your experiences. I want to make you a question that might sound a bit personal, but to the architect still. So knowing which is our role as architect, or which our role should be, knowing also contemporary society, how is it going, which is your biggest fear? I don't know if it's... I try. You try, actually.
Well, it's a but I would say, yes, maybe my biggest fear is to create an imposition to anyone else, for sure. Not allowing the possibility of that else to be expressed, to express itself. That for me would be probably an answer that I could say with a very difficult question right away.
But it's a simple answer. I mean, simple and clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we have, I think I saw the pursue.
Catherine, do you want to voice your question?
Sure. Hi, my name is Catherine. I'm a architecture graduate student over at RISD. Thank you so much for this lecture. My question is, how do we understand these questions of care and domesticity when it comes to people who approach space with temporality, such as refugees and displaced peoples, and what can we learn from the spaces that they treat?
Well, that is a very large question because, we're going to see much more displaced people and more for many reasons in the next years to come and decades. So I believe that, again, the further most important question is about when are we going to really hold to the notion that the most important thing we have to do for ourselves is care for ourselves. I would say that is a core question. I don't have the answers on how to treat that and how to think of it, because this is something that is a problem very major in the world. And obviously, I don't have the answers for those.
Yeah. Anthony, you had a question.
Yeah, I'm curious about, you mentioned the idea of forms that are meant to last 1,000 years. You referenced the supplier giving the 10-year guarantee and how sufficient that would be. And the proposals that you showed, a lot of the emphasis seemed to be on inspiring or encouraging a change in the way of living or inhabiting those spaces, whether that be communal living or shared spaces, or reinterpreting or reincorporating those ways of life back into urban environments. But does the built form itself, in terms of the materials you're using to construct it, are those escaping, I guess, the sort of carbon form and carbon modernity questions that we talked about in Lisa's class, or is it more that the form itself is trying to encourage the people that are inhabiting it to change, rather than the form, I guess, operating within the same lines that it's trying to perpetuate?
It's both. We've been always interested in addressing also the issues on materiality, as where it comes and what it does to the environment since ever. We've built with the materials that would allow us to do the most in many aspects, so it's very hard to judge them from different points of view. For example, we've been working in a botanical garden for 17 years now. And the moment we present the project, day one, 17 years ago, it's little pavilions all done in concrete. This is a region. And the director of the garden said, "Oh, I'm very surprised. You're telling us that we're going to build pavilions in our botanical garden out of concrete. I mean, what are you thinking? There's wood, all right?" And I'm like, "No, wood is in the forest in the US, and we're very far. There's no wood around." And he said, "Well, but then it's very unsustainable to build with concrete." I said, "Well, no, because if we build with wood, we have to bring the wood from Canada or from north of the US. That is going to produce a very big impact, first of all. But second of all, there is an average temperature of 32 degrees year-round centigrade. I don't know how much that is in Fahrenheit. Sorry, the world is in metric system. It's 80 or 85 or something, or 90s. That's the average temperature in this place. If we build with wood, it's very hard to sustain a comfortable temperature for anything to happen inside the building. So then it's the energy that you require to do that. It's much harder. It's much larger than what it's doing, building with wood there. So again, I think that the problem is generalizing and standardizing everything. One of the things in this case is solutions. Solutions need to be done locally, and that's what we have been working on. No, on another project, for example, we're asked to do a house with these hyper high requests of spaces, and then the budget was hyper reduced, and we said, well, the only way we can build a house with that amount of square meters and with that kind of spaces that we described is using the earth from the ground. So that was actually the solution for economical problem that we had, that obviously helped everything. So because we used the earth of the ground, literally, of that site, and we built a house, and we were able to fulfill economically the challenge. So I think that for me and in our work, the question of reducing the carbon footprint is even a large one, but not only focusing on exactly the direct thing, encapsulating like this.
I think there's also something embedded in your question about the reciprocity between form and behavior, right? Like, it's this notion of who, in terms of how we think of ourselves as architects. And I think it relates to your concern about imposing yourself on someone, right? Because as we're thinking as architects of the new home for life, it's very risky to just sound the same as the modernists who use that exact same language, right? And we know that was a very important imposition onto ways of life, kind of nail in the coffin of an agrarian society, and this would open the floodgates really for industrial society to take hold. So I mean, this question of form and behavior is a very important one. I think that you're right to ask that. But I mean, yeah, I think as you say, it's like with anything that involves the making of a work of architecture, it's all of these things at once. I think it is right, but I think that there's something interesting then, though, in the way that your work operates, because in a way it's the recognition that the architectural form has the capacity to do it, but it's to ask whether the form has a capacity to open different possibilities of behavior, right? And I think in part that's part of what the breaking open of the house is. It's to allow like a multiplicity of relations to then happen, and in so doing, you kind of, yes, like architecture will always have those affordances, and once you break the house open, you will disallow other things. That will be inevitable because there's always, in the nature of the affordance of form, is always that. But what I see in your work is this kind of question of multiplicity of options within a kind of more open form. That maybe helps with the question. I think we should start wrapping up. How are we at time? Yeah, I think that's we're at time. So let's give a round of applause.